Out in the silent emptiness of space, far beyond the reach of ordinary trade routes, a group of alien ships drifted helplessly. They had once been part of a proud coalition fleet, strong and confident as they traveled through the dark corridors of the galaxy. But one sudden accident had changed everything. A reactor overload in the lead cruiser had triggered a chain reaction, and in minutes their formation was torn apart. Flames, debris, and panic spread like a storm. Some ships managed to survive, but their engines were crippled, their supplies running low, and their crews injured. For days, they floated there, trapped in a region of space where few ever traveled. They were cold, tired, and desperate. Out of sheer instinct, the fleet commanders had sent out a universal distress call. It was a signal no one liked to use, a plea that meant surrendering all pride and admitting weakness. They knew there was no guarantee anyone would answer. The galaxy was wide and unforgiving. Sometimes signals like that traveled for decades without a response. Sometimes they never reached anyone at all. Still, they sent it, over and over, pulsing out through the void like the cry of a drowning sailor hoping anyone would hear. But even as they waited, many aboard the alien ships whispered among themselves, what if the wrong kind of beings heard the signal? What if pirates came instead of rescuers? Or worse, what if the Deathworlders heard it? To most civilized species, Earth was a name spoken with a mixture of fascination and fear. They called it a death world, a planet where storms raged, predators hunted in every jungle, and the ground itself shook with earthquakes. The stories of humans were just as wild. They said humans could breathe thin air that would suffocate others. They said humans ate food so toxic that no alien could survive even a bite. They said humans were reckless, unpredictable, and stronger than they had any right to be. Some even claimed humans were too strange to ever be trusted. So when the crew sent out their call for help, they prayed it would not be humans who answered. They would rather drift into silence than face the dangers of Deathworlders. Time passed. Hours turned into long, aching days. Their water supplies dropped. Injured crew members groaned in pain. The lights on their ships flickered weakly, each pulse a reminder that power was fading. Hope grew smaller and smaller, like a candle about to go out. Then, one day, their sensors detected movement. A ship was approaching. At first, the aliens dared not believe it. A ship in this empty sector? It had to be chance. But as the vessel grew closer, its profile appeared on their scanners and their hearts sank. It was not a design they recognized from the coalition. It was not a trading vessel, not a patrol ship. The shape was wrong. Rough edges, sturdy plating, engines that looked overbuilt for their size. It was a human ship. Panic spread among the stranded fleet. Voices rose in their command decks. Some shouted to shut off the distress beacon immediately, to pretend no one was there. Others argued it was too late. The humans had already locked onto their signal. They would be found no matter what. Fear became a heavy shadow across every corridor. But fear or not, the humans kept coming. Their ship slowed, scanning the damaged fleet with careful precision. The alien commanders expected weapons to fire, expected boarding parties with force. Instead, they watched with confusion as the human vessel broadcast a message across all open channels. Attention, vessels. We received your distress call. We're here to help. The words were simple. The tone was calm. But to the aliens, it was almost unbelievable. Humans offering help? The coalition captains exchanged uneasy glances. Was this some kind of trick? Were the Deathworlders pretending to be kind just to lower their guard? Yet as the minutes passed, there was no sign of hostility. Instead, the human ship launched small shuttles carrying supplies. Containers of food, water, and medical packs floated across the void, guided by tiny thrusters until they reached the docking bays of the damaged ships. The aliens stared at the containers in disbelief. They were not poisoned. They were not traps. They were genuine aid. Still, hesitation clung to them. A few captains refused to open the containers, suspicious of hidden motives. But hunger and pain wore down their resistance. When the first injured crew was treated with human medicine and survived, shock spread like wildfire. It worked. The Deathworlders were not trying to kill them. They were saving them. On the alien flagship, officers gathered in tense silence as they watched human engineers in bulky suits cross the void. These strange beings, with their awkward movements and strange faces, began examining broken hulls and damaged power systems. Where alien engineers hesitated, fearing sparks or radiation, humans plunged in as if danger was just another puzzle to solve. They patched leaks, stabilized generators, and restored failing oxygen systems. The aliens could not understand it. Why were these humans risking themselves? What did they stand to gain? One alien crew member, younger and less hardened by prejudice, whispered aloud the thought others were too afraid to voice. Maybe they just don't want us to die. That idea spread slowly like a fragile seed taking root. The older officers dismissed it, unwilling to believe. But each passing hour made it harder to deny. The humans were not demanding payment. They were not boasting of their strength. They were simply working, sweating inside their heavy suits, their voices calm over the radios as they gave instructions. Still, fear lingered. Every alien heart carried the weight of the stories they had grown up with. They watched humans carefully, expecting at any moment for the mask to drop, for the Deathworlders to reveal their true nature. And yet, the true nature they were seeing was something no story had ever told them. In the cold silence of the damaged fleet, something unexpected was happening. Aliens who had spent their lives fearing humans were beginning to feel something new. Uncertainty? Yes, but also a strange glimmer of hope. Perhaps the terrifying Deathworlders were not monsters after all. Perhaps they were something far more complicated, something the galaxy had not yet fully understood. And as the humans continued their rescue work, the aliens realized a simple truth. Their lives now depended on the very beings they had once feared most. The first meeting between the stranded aliens and the humans was tense. Even after the supplies were delivered, even after water and medicine had eased their suffering, suspicion hung heavy in the air. The coalition ships had grown up on the old stories of Earth and its wild people. They could not forget the warnings whispered across star systems. Humans, they believed, were too reckless, too unpredictable, and too dangerous to be trusted. When the human shuttles touched down on the first alien vessel, every corridor was lined with wary soldiers gripping their weapons. They didn't point them, but the fear in their eyes was obvious. Their commanders told them to hold steady, to keep their distance, and to never let the humans out of sight. The hatch opened with a hiss, and the humans stepped inside. They looked different from the myths. Yes, they were taller and more solid than most species, with strange expressions on their faces that shifted too quickly to understand. But they were not growling. They were not shouting. They walked slowly, calmly, carrying toolkits instead of weapons. Their voices came through the translators. "We're here to help. Please, show us where the damage is worst." It was such a simple request, so ordinary, yet it stunned the alien crews. No demands, no threats. Just a question asked as if kindness was natural. Still, not everyone believed it. Some alien officers exchanged doubtful glances. Could this be part of some clever trap? The humans didn't wait for an answer. They began working right away. With scanners and bare hands, they examined cracked walls and broken pipes. Where machines failed, they improvised, bending metal into shape, welding patches, and using whatever scraps they could find. The aliens watched in silence, astonished by how quickly they adapted. On one ship, the oxygen system had been close to collapse. The alien engineers had given up on it, saying the entire structure would need replacing, a task impossible in deep space. The humans looked at the mess for a few minutes, then shrugged and got to work. They rerouted airlines through emergency ducts, repurposed unused cables for power, and built a rough but working filter out of their own supplies. Within hours, air flowed steadily again. The aliens stared at the readouts in disbelief. Their engineers had declared it hopeless. Yet these strangers from Earth had solved it like a puzzle, smiling through the sweat dripping down their faces. Not all moments went smoothly. Some aliens flinched at the way humans laughed too loudly, as if they were too comfortable in the face of disaster. Others were unsettled by how casually humans walked through dangerous areas, unafraid of sparks, radiation, or unstable floors. To the aliens, every step looked like madness, but to the humans it was just another day. They had grown up in a world where danger was ordinary, where storms, predators, and disasters were part of life. To them, patching up a broken ship in the dark of space was simply a new kind of challenge. Still, distrust lingered. In the mess halls where food was shared, some aliens refused to touch the meals humans offered. They whispered that maybe the food was poisoned or maybe it would twist their insides, but others, too hungry to resist, tried small bites, and to their shock it was edible. Different, yes. Strange textures, unusual spices, but not harmful. The humans had even gone out of their way to adjust the recipes, making sure the meals matched what the coalition species could digest. Slowly, the fear began to soften. The injured who had been treated with human medicine grew stronger each day. Systems that had once seemed beyond repair hummed back to life. The humans did not leave after giving supplies. They stayed working side by side with the crews even when it meant crawling through narrow tunnels or standing in freezing chambers. They joked with one another in their rough, strange voices, sometimes even making light of the danger, but they never stopped working. On the bridge of the flagship, the alien commanders argued late into the night. Some were still convinced it was all a trap.
Why else would Deathworlders help us?
They demanded. What do they gain from this? Others, however, were beginning to doubt their fears. Look at their actions, one said quietly. If they meant harm, they would have let us die already. Instead, they saved us. Meanwhile, down in the lower decks, something unexpected was happening. Alien crew members who had once been terrified of the humans found themselves watching them with curiosity. The way humans carried heavy equipment without complaint. The way they laughed even when things went wrong. The way they encouraged each other, clapping shoulders or offering quick words of support, as if teamwork was second nature. One young alien engineer found himself paired with a human worker while repairing a generator. At first, he was stiff and silent, afraid of saying the wrong thing, but the human kept talking, telling little stories, asking questions, even laughing at his own mistakes. Bit by bit, the engineer relaxed. By the end of the shift, the two were working in rhythm, trading tools and finishing each other's sentences about the repair. For the first time, the young alien wondered if the stories about humans had been wrong. Even so, there were close calls. On one damaged ship, a group of alien soldiers grew nervous when they saw humans opening a sealed storage bay. Convinced it was an attempt at theft, they rushed forward, weapons ready. But the humans simply pointed to the coolant leaking from the wall and explained calmly that the bay would have exploded if left alone. They had not come to steal. They had come to prevent a disaster. That moment spread quickly across the fleet. Stories were told of how the Deathworlders had walked straight into danger, not for themselves, but to protect lives. The fear began to crack, replaced by an uneasy respect. Day by day, the broken fleet began to feel less like a group of victims and more like a group of survivors. And at the center of that survival were the humans, working, sweating, laughing, never demanding anything in return. The aliens couldn't understand it, but they couldn't deny it either. The Deathworlders were not what they had expected. Still, deep in their hearts, many held on to a question they dared not ask aloud. Could this kindness be trusted? Or was it only a mask, hiding something far more dangerous beneath? For now, though, the fear was quieter, and in its place, something new was growing, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Even after days of repairs, food sharing, and medical care, the fleet was far from calm. Fear still lurked in the shadows. The humans had given no reason to mistrust them, but the weight of old stories was hard to ignore. Every alien on those ships had grown up hearing how dangerous Deathworlders were. And when fear is planted young, it does not disappear easily. It started with whispers. On the mess decks, in the engine rooms, during long nights when the lights flickered and the air felt too thin, alien crew members muttered to each other. They said humans must be hiding something. No one gives away so much help without a price. Others argued that the humans were studying them, learning their weaknesses before turning against them. The whispers spread like smoke, thickening the air of suspicion. The commanders noticed the tension. Even as human teams fixed broken hulls and kept life support running, alien officers exchanged wary looks. Some openly questioned if allowing Deathworlders aboard had been a mistake. The younger crew were caught in the middle, some drawn toward the strange humans, curious about their easy laughter and fearless work, while others clung tightly to the warnings they had always believed. The breaking point came when one human team tried to stabilize a damaged reactor. The alien engineers had already given up, declaring it too unstable to touch. But the humans insisted it could be saved. They walked into the chamber with heavy suits, their bodies lit by the glow of the pulsing core. To the aliens watching, it looked like madness. Radiation levels were high, containment shields cracked, alarms wailing. The humans should have turned back. Instead, they worked faster, voices steady over the comms as they traded tools and shouted instructions. Outside, a crowd of aliens gathered, their fear twisting into anger. "They'll blow us all up," one said bitterly. "They don't care about us. They'll gamble with our lives like a game. Others agreed, their voices sharp with panic. They are Deathworlders. Risk is in their blood. They will kill us without meaning to. The shouting grew until weapons were drawn. A group of alien soldiers demanded the humans stop at once and leave the chamber. Their commanders hesitated, torn between fear and the undeniable fact that without human help the reactor would explode anyway. The moment teetered on the edge of disaster. One wrong move and the fragile trust would collapse completely. Inside the chamber, the humans didn't stop. They worked with grim focus, sweat dripping inside their helmets. One made a joke about how this was just another day on Earth, and the others laughed even as sparks rained down. To the aliens outside, the laughter sounded insane. How could anyone laugh in the face of such danger? But slowly, their disbelief turned into something else. They saw how the humans supported each other, never panicking, never turning on one another, just pushing forward until the final warning light went dark, and the reactor stabilized with a low hum. The chamber doors opened, and the humans walked out tired but smiling. One raised a hand in a casual wave as if they had just fixed a leaky pipe instead of saving the entire ship. For a long moment, the aliens stood frozen. Then, without meaning to, some began to clap. It was awkward, hesitant, but real. Others joined in, until the narrow hall echoed with applause. But not everyone was convinced. Later that night, in the officers' quarters, arguments erupted again. Some claimed the humans had only fixed the reactor so they could keep control of the fleet. Others said the laughter, the recklessness proved they were dangerous. But a smaller, quieter group began to speak differently. They argued that maybe the humans were not monsters. Maybe the stories had been exaggerated. Maybe the Deathworlders were just different. On the lower decks, meanwhile, something even stranger was happening. Alien crew members who had once kept their distance from the humans found themselves talking with them. The conversation started small, questions about tools, about food, about strange human habits. But soon the talks grew longer. The humans told stories of their world, of storms that ripped across oceans, of forests filled with wild animals, of deserts so hot the ground cracked open. To the aliens, these stories were terrifying. To the humans, they were simply part of life. And yet the humans didn't tell the stories to scare anyone. They told them with smiles, with gestures, with a kind of pride. Not pride in danger, but pride in surviving, in adapting, and never giving up. For the first time, the aliens began to see the Deathworlders not as monsters, but as survivors, beings who had learned to laugh in the face of chaos because chaos had always been their home. Still, mistrust clung to some like a stubborn shadow. One evening, during a supply distribution, an argument broke out. A group of aliens accused the humans of taking too much, of hiding resources. Voices rose, hands reached for weapons, and the room fell into silence. Everyone waited for the humans to respond with anger. Instead, the humans stepped back, raised their hands, and calmly opened their supply crates for all to see. Inside were nothing but tools, food, and medical packs. They had taken nothing for themselves. The tension broke like a brittle shell. The aliens looked at each other in shame, realizing their fear had almost caused bloodshed. The humans didn't scold them. They just shrugged, made a light-hearted comment about how trust takes time, and went back to work. That moment spread across the fleet as quickly as the earlier whispers of fear. For every story of suspicion, there was now a story of patience, of kindness, of humans choosing peace instead of pride. And the younger crew, the ones with less hardened hearts, began to believe more strongly each day that maybe the galaxy had been wrong about the Deathworlders. But even as trust slowly grew, it was fragile. Everyone knew one mistake could shatter it completely. And beneath it all, the same question haunted every mind. Why were the humans helping? They had asked for nothing in return. They demanded no payment, no favors, no promises of alliance. They simply worked, as if saving strangers was reason enough. That was the hardest part for the aliens to understand. In their world, every favor had a price, every action carried weight. But for the humans, kindness seemed to be its own reward. And that perhaps was more unsettling than any weapon. The days stretched into weeks, and the broken fleet began to take shape again. Engines hummed. Lights shone brighter. Wounded crew walked the halls with strength returning to their limbs. Hope, long lost, flickered back to life. And at the center of it all were the humans, still laughing, still sweating, still working without complaint. Some aliens still whispered warnings in the dark. But others began to whisper something new. Maybe the Deathworlders were not to be feared. Maybe they were to be trusted. Time was running out for the fleet. Repairs had brought light and air back to many of the stranded ships, and food and medicine had eased their suffering. But one danger still hung over them like a silent shadow. Deep in the heart of the flagship, the main reactor remained unstable. The humans had bought them time by patching systems and rerouting power, but those were temporary fixes. The truth was simple. If the reactor failed, the entire fleet would be lost in the explosion. Everyone knew it. They could hear it in the hum of the failing core, in the strange vibration that echoed through the floors, in the constant alarms that flickered across screens. The alien commanders gathered every day, arguing about what to do. Some said they should abandon the flagship and scatter, hoping at least some ships would survive. Others said they should keep trying to repair it with their own engineers, even though every attempt so far had failed. But no one wanted to admit the truth, that without the humans they had no chance at all. The humans had already offered to take on the reactor directly. They said they could stabilize it, maybe even save it completely, but the alien leaders hesitated. Allowing Deathworlders to touch the heart of their fleet was terrifying. If humans succeeded, the fleet would owe them everything. If they failed, the fleet would be nothing but dust in the void. Tension thickened. The alien crews felt it in every corridor. Meals were eaten in silence. Conversations stopped whenever humans walked by. Everyone was waiting for a decision, waiting for something to happen. At last, when the reactor tremors grew too strong to ignore, the leaders agreed. The humans would be allowed to try. The order was given and word spread like lightning. Some aliens cheered in relief, hoping the humans would save them once again. Others muttered that this was the end, that the Deathworlders would push too far and destroy them all. The humans prepared quietly. They did not give speeches or boast. They gathered tools, tested their suits, and spoke softly to each other in their rough voices. Some even cracked small jokes trying to lighten the mood, as if they were heading into just another job. To the aliens watching, the casual attitude was almost shocking. How could they be so calm when they were about to walk into certain death? When the time came, the humans entered the reactor chamber. The doors sealed behind them, leaving the rest of the fleet to wait in anxious silence. Hours passed. Inside, the humans worked tirelessly, moving through clouds of heat and radiation, climbing over cracked panels, improvising with whatever they had. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, and several times the chamber shook with violent tremors. Each time, aliens outside gripped the railings, convinced it was the end. But each time, the humans pressed on. One alien officer stood at the observation window, watching the human figures move like shadows against the glow of the unstable core. Their movements were strange, fast, unafraid, full of determination. "They look like they're fighting," the officer whispered, "but not against us, against the reactor itself." Inside, the humans worked with a rhythm that came from trust. They handed tools to one another without asking, shouted warnings, shared quick reassurances. At one point, when the heat grew unbearable and one human nearly collapsed, the others pulled them back, refusing to let anyone fall behind. No one worked alone. No one gave up. Outside, hours turned into a full day. The aliens barely slept, barely ate, their eyes fixed on the monitors. The tension was unbearable. Every flicker of the reactor readout sent waves of fear through the ships. And yet mixed with the fear was something else, admiration. The aliens had never seen such stubbornness. Where they themselves would have retreated, the humans pushed forward. Where they saw hopelessness, the humans saw another challenge to solve. Finally, after endless hours of waiting, the alarms fell silent. The reactor's violent hum softened into a steady, healthy rhythm. Lights across the monitors turned green one after another. The humans had done it. They had not only stabilized the core, they had rebuilt it stronger than before. The chamber doors opened and the humans emerged. Their suits were scorched, their bodies shaking with exhaustion, but their faces, those strange, expressive faces, were smiling. They looked like people who had just fought a war and won. For a long moment, no one moved. The aliens stood frozen, unable to believe what they were seeing. Then slowly the silence broke into cheers. From the command deck to the engine rooms, voices rose together in a sound the fleet had not heard in weeks. Joy. Crew members clapped, shouted, even wept. Against every fear, against every doubt, the Deathworlders had saved them all. The mood across the fleet changed overnight. Where there had been fear, there was now gratitude. Where there had been suspicion, there was now respect. The humans walked the halls and aliens no longer pulled away in fear. Instead, they nodded, smiled awkwardly, or even reached out to shake hands. For the first time, the fleet saw humans not as Deathworlders, not as dangerous strangers, but as allies. Beings who had risked everything without asking for anything in return. Still, the change was not complete. Some alien leaders remained cautious. They reminded their crews that kindness could still be a mask, that debt to Deathworlders could be dangerous. But their warnings sounded weaker now, drowned out by the stories spreading through the ships. Stories of humans crawling into collapsing chambers, of humans refusing to abandon each other, of humans who laughed even when death was a breath away. The younger aliens especially were drawn to the humans. They followed them, asked questions, tried to copy their strange jokes and gestures. They wanted to understand this species that could turn fear into courage, despair into determination. One night in the quiet of the mess hall, a young alien asked a human directly, "Why did you do it? Why risk so much for us?" The human paused, thinking. Then they shrugged. "Because you needed help. If we were in your place, we'd want someone to do the same." The answer was so simple, so ordinary, and yet it struck the aliens harder than any speech. No hidden motive, no grand bargain, just empathy, just humanity. From that moment, the bond deepened. Trust was still fragile, but it was real. The aliens began to see that maybe the old stories had been wrong. Humans were dangerous, yes. Reckless, yes. But not because they wanted to harm others. Because they refused to give up even when the universe itself seemed to turn against them. As the fleet floated once more with power restored and engines warming, the aliens looked at the humans differently. They no longer saw Deathworlders as monsters. They saw them as survivors. And more importantly, they saw them as friends who had stood at their side when no one else had. And deep in the silence of space, a new thought began to take root. Maybe the galaxy had judged humans too quickly. Maybe the very traits once feared, recklessness, stubbornness, courage, were the very traits the galaxy needed most. The fleet was alive again. Where once the corridors had been dark and heavy with despair, lights now glowed steady and warm. Engines hummed with power. Air was clean, food supplies steady, and the wounded who had once been near death now walked with strength in their steps. Against all odds, the scattered survivors of the accident had not only been saved, they were whole again. And at the center of it all stood the humans. For many of the alien crew, it was still hard to believe. When the distress call was first sent, they had prayed for anyone but the Deathworlders to hear it. Humans were supposed to be monsters of survival, reckless and dangerous. Yet those same humans had walked into fire and radiation, had shared their food and medicine, had refused to abandon anyone even when it put their own lives in danger. Now, as the ships gathered together for their final repairs, a quiet realization settled over the fleet. They were alive because of the humans. Not because of an alliance, not because of a bargain, but because a group of strangers had answered a call for help and chosen compassion over fear. The alien commanders called a meeting, their voices formal and serious as they addressed the humans. They thanked them, words heavy with sincerity, but the humans only smiled and waved the thanks away. Anyone would have done the same, they said, but the aliens knew that wasn't true. They had sent the distress call across half the galaxy, and only the humans had come. In the days that followed, something remarkable began to happen. The walls between species once so solid began to crumble. Where aliens had once avoided human laughter, now they joined in. Where they had once been suspicious of human food, now they shared meals together, trading recipes and laughing at the strange tastes. Children of the fleet followed humans through the halls, staring wide-eyed at their stories and trying to copy their gestures. But perhaps the most powerful change was not in laughter or meals, but in trust. When alarms rang, when systems faltered, when danger flickered at the edges of safety, the aliens no longer panicked. They looked to the humans, knowing that if disaster struck, the Deathworlders would stand with them. Not everyone was ready to forget the old fears. Some alien leaders still whispered warnings, still reminded their people that humans were unpredictable, that their strength could be dangerous if turned against them. But those warnings carried less weight now. The crews had seen the truth with their own eyes. They had seen humans choose kindness again and again when they could have walked away. One evening, as the fleet prepared for departure, a quiet ceremony was held. It was not planned by the commanders, but by the crews themselves. In the docking bay of the flagship, aliens gathered side by side with humans. There were no speeches, no grand declarations. Instead, one alien stepped forward holding a small piece of wreckage from the first destroyed ship. They placed it in the center of the room, a reminder of all that had been lost. Then, without a word, one of the humans stepped forward and added a patch from their own torn suit. Soon others followed. Pieces of metal, tools, cloth, tokens from the weeks of survival were placed together in a growing circle. It became a symbol, not of loss, but of unity, of survival shared between strangers who had once feared each other. In the silence that followed, one alien voice broke softly through. "We called for help and we feared the worst. But the worst never came. Instead, you came." The humans didn't answer with speeches. They simply nodded, their faces carrying that strange mixture of pride and humility that the aliens were still learning to understand. When the time finally came for the fleet to depart, engines roared to life. Ships that had once been drifting wrecks now moved with purpose. One by one, they aligned for the jump back to safe space. The humans prepared to leave as well, their ship battered from weeks of work but still strong. There was a strange heaviness in the air. For all the suspicion, all the fear, a bond had been formed that no one wanted to break. As docking clamps released and hatches closed, aliens pressed their hands to the glass, watching the humans prepare to leave. Some shouted thanks across comms, others simply stood in silence, unwilling to look away. The humans, true to their nature, did not draw out the farewell. They gave quick waves, a few jokes, and then their ship drifted free. Engines flared, and in a burst of light the Deathworlders were gone, leaving the fleet alone in the quiet once more. But it did not feel like the same silence that had followed the accident. This silence was filled with something new. Hope. In the days that followed, the aliens spoke of what had happened. Stories spread quickly, first among the fleet, then to other colonies, then across star systems, the tale of how humans had answered a distress call when no one else did, how they had walked into fire and chaos not for reward but because someone needed help. The old fear of Deathworlders did not vanish overnight, but it cracked piece by piece, replaced by something different: respect, curiosity, even admiration. For the humans, the story was simple. They had answered a call because it was the right thing to do, but for the galaxy, it was something far greater. It was proof that maybe the most feared species among them was not a threat, but an ally. And so, what began as fear ended as understanding. The distress call that had once carried despair became the start of a bond no one had expected. From then on, whenever whispers of humans spread through alien worlds, they were no longer spoken only with fear. They were spoken with memory, of laughter in the face of danger, of kindness in the middle of disaster, of a hand reaching out in the dark and pulling strangers back into the light. The galaxy had learned something it would not forget. Deathworlders were dangerous, yes, but not because they sought destruction. They were dangerous because they refused to give up on life, whether it was their own or someone else's. And sometimes that kind of danger was exactly what the galaxy needed most.